This is the case of Dr. Karl Tanzler, a doctor who had a very unhealthy obsession with one of his patients. Tanzler went by many names. He was listed as George Karl Tanzler on his German marriage certificate. He was listed as Karl Tanzler von Kozel on his United States citizenship papers, and he was listed as Karl Tanzler on his Florida death certificate. Some of his hospital records were signed Count Karl Tanzler von Kozel. He was born as Karl Tanzler or George Karl Tanzler on February 8, 1877 in Dresden, Germany. Tanzler grew up in Imperial Germany, but at some point, wound up in Australia just prior to the outbreak of World War I. March and April 1939. He stayed in Australia before and his internment during the Great War. He then returned to Germany after the war. This is a direct quote from his biography. Many years ago, Karl traveled from India to Australia with the intention of proceeding to the South Seas Islands. He paused in Australia to collect equipment and suitable boats, and to become acquainted with prevailing weather and sea conditions. However, he became interested in engineering and electrical work there, bought property, boats, an organ, an island in the Pacific, so that he was still in Australia at the end of 10 years. He had just begun to build a trans-ocean flyer when the war broke out and the British military authorities placed him in a concentration camp for safekeeping along with many officers in India and China that were prisoners of war. Later he was removed to Trial Bay to a prison. At the end of the war no prisoner was permitted to return to his former residence, but all were shipped to the prisoners' exchange in Holland. When Karl von Kozel was released he set out to find his mother, from whom he had not heard since the beginning of the war. Finding her safe, he remained with her for 3 years, witnessing the chaos that followed in the wake of the war. Finally, she suggested that her son return to his sister in the United States. Tanzler's account of Trial Bay Jail, his secret building of a sailboat, etc., is confirmed by Neonatilika Mahathera, who mentions that he planned to escape from the jail with Count Karl von Kozel in a sailboat, and provides other information about the internment of Germans in Australia during World War I. Around 1920, following his return to Germany, Tanzler married Doris Schaefer. Together they had 2 children, Aisha Tanzler and Clarista Tanzler, who died of diphtheria. Tanzler moved to the United States from Germany in 1926, sailing from Rotterdam on February 6, 1926 to Havana, Cuba. From Cuba he settled in Zephyrhills, Florida, where his sister had already gone to the USA, and was later joined by his wife and 2 daughters. Leaving his family behind in Zephyrhills in 1927, he took a job as a radiology technician at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West, Florida under the name Karl von Kozel. Radiology was relatively new and was considered a miracle cure-all at this time in history. During his childhood in Germany, and later while traveling briefly in Genoa, Italy, Tanzler claimed to have been visited by visions of a dead, purported ancestor, Countess Anna Constantia von Kozel, who revealed the face of his true love, an exotic dark-haired woman, to him. On April 22, 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, Tanzler met Maria Elena Helen Milagro de Hoyos, a local Cuban-American woman who had been brought to the hospital by her mother for an examination. Tanzler immediately recognized her as the beautiful dark-haired woman that had been revealed to him in his earlier visions. By all accounts, Hoyos was viewed as a local beauty in Key West. Elena was the daughter of local cigar maker Francisco Pancho Hoyos and Aurora Milagro. She had 2 sisters, Florinda and Ana Milagro Hoyos, who married Mario Medina and also succumbed to tuberculosis, and Celia Milagro Hoyos. Medina, Nana's husband, was electrocuted trying to rescue a co-worker who hit a power line with his crane at a construction site. On February 18, 1926, Elena married Luis Mesa, the son of Caridad and Isaac Mesa. Mesa left Elena shortly after she suffered a miscarriage of the couple's child, and moved to Miami. Elena was legally married to Mesa at the time of her death. Elena was eventually diagnosed with tuberculosis, a typically fatal disease at the time, that eventually claimed the lives of almost all of her immediate family. Tanzler, with his self-professed medical knowledge, attempted to treat and cure Elena with a variety of medicines, as well as X-ray and electrical equipment, that were brought to the Hoyos home. Tanzler showered Elena with gifts of jewelry and clothing, and allegedly professed his love to her, but no evidence has surfaced to show that any of his affection was reciprocated by Elena. Despite Tanzler's best efforts, Elena died of tuberculosis at her parents' home in Key West on October 25, 1931. Tanzler paid for her funeral, and with the permission of her family, He then commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery, which he visited almost every night. One evening in April 1933, Tanzler crept through the cemetery where Elena was buried and removed her body from the mausoleum, carting it through the cemetery after dark on a toy wagon, and transporting it to his home. He reportedly said that Elena's spirit would come to him when he would sit by her grave and serenade her corpse with a favorite Spanish song. He also said that she would often tell him to take her from the grave. Tanzler attached the corpse's bones together with piano wire and fitted the face with glass eyes. As the skin of the corpse decomposed, Tanzler replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. As the hair fell out of Elena's decomposing scalp, Tanzler fashioned a wig from her hair, which he had previously obtained from her mother. Tanzler filled the corpse's abdominal and chest cavity with rags to keep the original form, dressed Elena's remains in stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and kept the body in his bed. Tanzler also used copious amounts of perfume, disinfectants, and preserving agents to mask the odor and forestall the effects of the corpse's decomposition. In October 1940, Elena's sister Florinda heard rumors of Tanzler sleeping with the disinterred body of her sister and confronted Tanzler at his home, where Elena's body was eventually discovered. He was also caught dancing with her corpse in front of an open window. Can you imagine glancing over at your neighbors in the late evening and seeing him with a woman corpse dancing? Florinda notified the authorities, and Tanzler was arrested and detained. Tanzler was psychiatrically examined and found mentally competent to stand trial on the charge of wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. After a preliminary hearing on October 9, 1940 at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West, Tanzler was held to answer on the charge, but the case was eventually dropped, and he was released, as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. Shortly after the corpse's discovery by authorities, Elena's body was examined by physicians and pathologists, and put on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where it was viewed by as many as 6,800 people. Elena's body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery where the remains were buried in an unmarked grave, in a secret location, to prevent further tampering. The facts underlying the case and the preliminary hearing drew much interest from the media at the time, most notably, from the Key West Citizen and Miami Herald, and created a sensation among the public, both regionally and nationwide. The public mood was generally sympathetic to Tanzler, whom many viewed as an eccentric romantic. Though not reported contemporaneously, research, most notably by authors Harrison and Swicegood, has revealed evidence of Tanzler's necrophilia with Elena's corpse. Two physicians, Dr. DePoo and Dr. Foraker, who attended the 1940 autopsy of Elena's remains, recalled that a vaginal tube had been inserted in the vaginal area of the corpse that allowed for intercourse. In 1944, Tanzler moved to Pasco County, Florida, close to Zephyrhills, Florida, where he wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp publication, Fantastic Adventures, in 1947. His home was near his wife Doris, who apparently helped to support Tanzler in his later years. Tanzler received United States citizenship in 1950 in Tampa. Separated from his obsession, Tanzler used a death mask to create a life-sized effigy of Elena, and lived with it until his death at age 75 on July 3, 1952. His body was discovered on the floor of his home 3 weeks after his death. He died under the name Carl Tanzler. It has been recounted that Tanzler was found in the arms of Elena's effigy upon discovery of his corpse, but his obituary reported that he died on the floor behind one of his organs. The obituary recounted, a metal cylinder on a shelf above a table and it wrapped in silken cloth and a robe was a waxen image. It has been written that Tanzler had the bodies switched, or that Elena's remains were secretly returned to him, and that he died with the real body of Elena. The story of Tanzler and Elena would be reproduced in pulp magazines in the years following his death, with various parties adding new details to the case. An article written by Michelle Felder in 1982 tells of how renovation workers found a note allegedly written by Tanzler, confessing to have killed Elena by poisoning her. She died because I gave this to her mercifully. I mixed the root of wolfsbane, monkshood, with aconite diluted. It was palatable and my loved one departed this miserable world on October 25, 1931. Suffer no more, sweet Elena. I have sent you to the angels with my golden elixir. Perez also claimed Tanzler had once told him that he would kill Elena if necessary to fulfill his destiny. That is the end of this disturbing story. I hope you enjoyed this format, as this will be the how I will share these shorter stories with you, as the other stories take much longer to research and put together. But I hope every enjoyed this story. Please leave me a like or a comment and tell a friend whether you like me or hate me. I am here to bring you these stories. Take care and good night.